My name is Heidi, and I'm a senior researcher in the Food Analytical Group, or Analytical Food Chemistry. And together with people, our colleagues in the group and in other groups at the Institute, I work with insects. And today, I'll talk a little bit about insects and some of the activities that we have. And I will hopefully also answer the question that I posed in my title. The insects are here. Are they safe to eat? And when I say insects, many of you are probably thinking of a bee or a spider or ants. When I say insects as food or as feed, some of you are probably thinking about crickets, beetles, even mealworm. What I'm thinking of are these. I'm thinking about larvae. And I'm also thinking about large-scale production of larvae. In the large-scale production of larvae, you have an organic material that you turn into a substrate which the larvae feed on. And one of the species that are used in the insect production today is the black shoulder fly. This is the one I'm showing you up here. In Danish, it's called sort soldaterflue. And these larvae, they typically feed on their substrate. That is the black thing you see in the background of the picture. They feed on this substrate for about 7 to 10 days, and then they are harvested. And the larvae you see in the picture here, they are ready to be harvested. So after they are harvested, they are processed into a protein fraction and an oil fraction. And these products, the insect meal and the insect oil, they can be used in animal feed, and they can be used in production of food. Today in Europe, the main use of them is it's mainly the insect meal that is used, and it's mainly used in feed for farmed animals. Today, you're allowed to feed insect meal to feed that goes to fish, pigs, and poultry. And when we speak about farmed animals, within the European Union, the insects that are used in insect production is also farmed animals. That is because we keep the animals in captivity and we raise them with a specific purpose. So they are considered by law farmed animals. This also means that the legislation that are in place for farmed animals, for the farming of fish and land animals, the same set of legislation applies to the production of insects. And within the legislation, one of the things that are regulated are the feed. We cannot just feed farmed animals whatever we have available. We can only feed them feed ingredients that are considered safe. The insect larvae, they are typically fed approved feed ingredients like corn, but they can also be fed some form of foodstuffs. Some of them are allowed. You can use cake, bread, you can use vegetables, and you can also use cereals. Yeah, so many of the industry today, they actually use former foodstuff as a part of their substrates. So they take a resource that would otherwise have been thrown out, feed them to insects, and make new resources that can be fed back into the food production chain. One of the things that you cannot use today is the food waste. And we have a lot of food waste. You can probably take food waste from canteens or cafeterias, from the kitchen there, and feed them to insects. I'm sure the insects, they will grow on it. But today, we're not allowed to it because it's forbidden. So when we decide or think about using food waste to feed to the insects, we have to consider the hazards. And here I'm thinking about biological and chemical hazards. If we decide to use the food waste, we have to consider if we, by using that, will recycle or reintroduce some of the hazard that can be in the form of food or in the food waste back into the products and in the food production chain. Let's say we have some kitchen waste from the canteen and it contains raw chicken meat. Do we then risk of reintroducing Campylobacter back into the food chain? or if it contains vegetables, vegetable peels, they may contain pesticides. Do we recycle these pesticides if we decide to use food waste and feed it to the insects? We have an ongoing collaboration with colleagues at Aarhus University where we actually look at the possibility of recycling both biological and chemical hazards when using former food waste to feed to the insects. And we do this in dialogue with the Danish Veterinary and Food Administration. One of the things we have been looking at is the possible transfer of pesticides from the substrate to the insect larvae. And we've been doing this in a series of spike experiments where we intentionally add pesticides to the animals or to the insect substrate to see if the insects that feed on it take up the pesticides or not. We chose the pesticides based on the results from the annual monitoring of pesticides in fruit and vegetable on the Danish market. We had a look at all the results, and then we simply selected the 3 pesticides that were most frequently detected in the fruit and vegetables on the Danish market. We then spiked it to the feed, fed black soldier fly larvae on it for a week, then we took samples of the insects and analyzed them for the pesticides. And it turns out that pesticides in the substrate are transferred from the substrate to the insects. So that is something to consider when we evaluate the safety of using food waste. Some pesticides are actually taken up in the insects, so we risk the recycling of them. We are now doing more experiments, and we're also doing experiments with mealworm. So actually on the picture here, it's not the black soldier fly larvae you see, but it's mealworms. Don't know if you spotted them, but they are in the top of the picture in the feeding on their substrate. We are doing spike experiments where we intentionally add the pesticides to the substrate. So we also need to do surveys of what do we actually find in the food waste that is available. We need also information on what's in the possible food waste that we could feed to insects. Then turning back to the question that I posed in the beginning, are insects safe to eat? They are definitely here. We produce insects in large scale, and the product of the insects is turned into protein and oil that are used as ingredients in both feed and food, but at the moment mainly feed for farmed animals. We have legislation in place to ensure animal welfare and also feed and food safety. And we are collecting data on the use of food waste, data that food authorities can use when they evaluate whether or not food waste should be allowed. So essentially, I would say, with regards to biological and chemical hazards, the insects are safe to eat. And I guess the question now is, are we ready? Are we ready to eat them? Thank you.